right, so today we're going to be talking about eating intuitively, particularly with chronic conditions. So let's get started. And once again, this is just my disclaimer that a lot of the work that I do that's somewhat related to presentations for Northeast Georgia are supported in part by a grant that we have to develop a nutrition education program here in Tennessee that I'm hoping we can offer down in Georgia as well. So here's what we're going to discuss today. What is intuitive eating, the 10 key principles of intuitive eating as articulated by Evelyn Trively and Elise Resch. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'll share with you some research that's related to intuitive eating and chronic health conditions, as well as some of those benefits and challenges of intuitive eating with chronic conditions, and then encourage you to start your own intuitive eating journey if that's something that you want to do. So let's get started. Here are the learning objectives for today. And I want you to take just a moment to think about, do you eat intuitively? Or what does that mean to you? And if you don't eat intuitively, why is that? Why might it be a challenge for you to eat intuitively? And why do you find yourself not eating intuitively? In other words, probably eating a little more mindlessly. Maybe it's, grazing while you're watching television, or maybe even it's that you let yourself get to the point of being super hungry before you decide to feed your body. All of these things, there are, I think, certain factors for why this is the case for most people in society. So what is intuitive eating? I teach life cycle nutrition and have for years, and it's always amazing to me when I talk about infant and toddler nutrition that we are actually born with the ability to self-regulate what we eat. We have innate hunger cues. So, when babies get hungry, what do? They cry oftentimes. We talk to our students about helping parents understand those early hunger cues in babies. So it's when they get to the point of crying for hunger, they are really super hungry. But when they start, putting their fists in their mouth and kind of moving around and making a little bit of a sucking motion and those kind of things, a lot of times those are the earlier signs of hunger for a baby. They also are able to stop eating when they get full. It's quite amazing, any mother who has breastfed knows that, for most infants, that when they have had enough to eat, they will unlatch and they are satisfied. Same thing if they're being bottle fed. It's hard to get a baby to eat more than what they want to eat. They have those great hormones in their body that are telling them, you're hungry now. They eat at a certain pace, and then they realize that they are full and they don't desire anymore. It's the same thing when you start feeding a child. When they start to really push the spoon away and they don't want any more food, that's when you know they're full. This goes back to, so what can parents do to foster healthy eating in their children? And, we talk a lot about Ellen Satter's division of responsibility. So children decide what to eat, how much to eat, and when to eat, and it's the parents that provide the healthy options for the children to eat. Now, children, they can regulate their hunger and satiety, but they're not able to necessarily always pick out healthy foods. So that's why it's important for the parents to provide the healthy food options and model the good eating behavior of healthy foods. But, children will tend towards, certain sweet foods and things like that. So that's why it's important for them to have healthy options. But how much they eat, when and whether or not they eat, that ultimately is up to the child. And down the road they will develop some routines around that. So what is it that causes us to lose our ability to eat intuitively as we get older? Well, I've got some theories around this. Perhaps you do as well. Um, I think that when children start to school, they have a very structured day, which of course is important. I'm not saying that it is not. However, when a child starts to learn that, there are scheduled eating breaks, and they're usually pretty short. I'm thinking elementary school through high school especially. It's amazing. A lot of children or students, they're not able to get through the whole lunch line because of how short their breaks are. So, you learn to eat very quickly. You learn to eat what is there or what is most convenient. Sometimes students decide not to eat at all because their break is too short, and by the time they get their lunch at school, they may have 10 minutes and they would rather socialize with their peers. So I think that is when we start to lose that ability to eat intuitively. A lot of times there's peer pressure that we encounter as we get older. What's normal to eat? When should you eat? How much should you eat? Unfortunately, adolescent females especially, but it occurs with males too, they start to compare with each other who's eating what and who's eating less, and it becomes this, big comparison game. So a lot of times there's peer pressure around what to eat and how much to eat. And as we go along, we get exposed to so many diet rules. And of course, these rules change over time. So it gets even more challenging, right? Um, you know, Many years ago, when I first started becoming interested in nutrition, cholesterol was the big evil in our diet because we didn't understand what actually impacted our cholesterol levels. So I'm sure many of you remember the dietary advice to not eat eggs. Oh, avoid eggs, and eggs became the bad guys in our diet. So, we get a lot of diet rules. In today's culture, there's lots of information around things like the keto diet, um, avoiding carbohydrates, intermittent fasting, that you need to limit yourself to 8 hours a day eating window for better health. There's lots of diet rules that we get exposed to, and that can influence our eating. Another thing that I think makes it really hard to eat intuitively is that we are increasingly sedentary, which means that we're losing that connection between our mind and our body. So it gets a lot more difficult to listen to those physical cues in your body if you're not used to moving. And also, just as we sit, there are some other things that come into play. Sometimes it's a little bit of boredom, sometimes it's some anxiety. And so we start to think that we're hungry when maybe we aren't necessarily hungry. And that goes back to this idea of having increased stress in our lives, especially, throughout the pandemic. Thank goodness we are coming out on the other side now, but, I think we still feel that stress of not knowing what's going to be coming next, what to expect when we go out in public. Should we go out in public? Is the new variant going to come in and take hold again? We've got a lot of stress in our lives. We had stress before, and I feel like we have even more stress now. And so it makes it really difficult to listen to your body when you're under such high stress. So this brings us to the idea of, can we regain the ability to eat intuitively? So most of what I'm going to be sharing with you today does come from the Intuitive Eating book. It's now in its 4th edition from dietitians Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. Interesting thing is that as these two dietitians were working with patients separately about 30 years ago, getting close to 30 years now, they independently started developing this approach to intuitive eating. And then as they discovered that they were both using this approach, they came together to write the first edition of this book. And this book is definitely considered one of the game changers for a lot of people who struggle with either eating disorders or disordered eating patterns, to help them kind of get back into control of their eating, and enjoyment of eating is the real key here. So we're going to go through the 10 principles of intuitive eating. The first principle is reject the diet mentality. I want for you to take just a moment and think about how many diets you have been on in your life, if you are the kind of person who does dieting. And I would venture to say many of us are, unfortunately. I know for myself, as a nutrition professional, I still have the idea of I need to keep up with what's the latest diet trend and what's the research behind that diet trend, and is it effective? You know, should we all be doing intermittent fasting? Should we all be following a lower carbohydrate diet? What does the research say? And surely there is a specific eating pattern that helps people achieve the greatest optimal health. Even myself as as a nutrition professional, I still can be in that diet mentality. It's hard to get around it because we have so many news articles that talk to us about different diets and how they benefit your blood sugar levels, how they benefit your heart health, how they benefit your weight and your ability to manage your weight. So, really the first step is to recognize how that diet mentality shows up in your life. Do you find yourself always looking for the next plan to help you meet your health goals? Do you always think that that next perfect diet is right around the corner and it's going to be something that you can keep doing forever, and that's what you're looking for? If you find yourself thinking any of these thoughts, that really means that you are subscribed to diet culture and the diet mentality, and that's very normal because we talk about it so much in our society. So the first step is recognizing when that need for a particular diet to help you is still present, and to start to reject that ideal of the one-size-fits-all diet that is going to help you achieve the best health. Recognizing that all foods can fit in a healthy lifestyle, and it's important that you reclaim that ability to enjoy your food, to reclaim your ability to choose foods that support your health, but you enjoy as well. When you can get to that place and you're not always thinking about, oh my goodness, I had too many carbohydrates today. Oh, I did really good today. My day was protein packed. As soon as you start to move away from kind of having these diet rules in place and foods that you're paying attention to as being good or bad, that's when you know that you're starting to reject that diet mentality. Now, these principles are presented in a specific order, but it does not necessarily mean that you have to go through each one to get to the end. But I would say that the first several principles, you will be working through kind of one at a time. And the last two principles tend to come at the end of your journey, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. The next principle is to honor your hunger. When you feel hungry, you should eat. That's your body telling you that it needs more fuel right now. I think that what gets challenging, though, is being able to determine if you're feeling physical hunger versus you're feeling emotional hunger. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more with another principle. But with this particular principle, you want to pay attention to when you feel hungry and allow yourself to eat at that time. Where we start to get into, I think, feeling more physical hunger with stress or strong emotions and things like that is that our bodies oftentimes don't trust that we're going to allow them to have fuel when they need it because we may have been dieting or using restrictive eating for so long. So when your body gets used to the fact that you are going to ignore that hunger signal and you're going to make your body wait until a certain time to eat, and then you're going to give it certain foods that maybe your body is not craving, the body learns that it can't really trust you to be a good provider for it. And so trying to take back this idea of listening to your body for those early signs of hunger. So I talked about with infants, we want to work with parents to notice those really subtle signs of hunger coming on before the baby gets to full starvation mode and is very upset. We want to teach them that they're going to get food when they are hungry. And it is the same for us. We want to teach our body that we're going to pay attention when I start to notice those first hunger cues, as opposed to I wait until my stomach feels like it is just really churning and churning because it is so hungry before I'm going to feed it. So cueing into when you start to feel hunger is going to be important. We're going to talk a little bit more about what hunger means in just a few moments. The next principle is to make peace with food. So not only do we want to feed our bodies when they're hungry, but we also want to pay attention to what is it that the body is telling us that it needs and wants in this moment. No food is inherently good or bad, although we do assign those characteristics to certain foods based on diet culture and diet mentality. So we want to work towards making peace with food, understanding that all foods can fit within a healthy lifestyle, and that when we are depriving ourselves of the foods that we truly enjoy and truly love, we're really setting ourselves up for sabotage down the road as far as our eating goes. Because when we get a hold of and happen to allow ourselves to eat that forbidden food, we have a greater tendency to overeat if we have not allowed ourselves to enjoy it along and along. And once again, this goes back to having, all kinds of diet rules around, well, I can't have that food, or I can only have it on this one treat day. And so the body starts to crave it more and more. Whereas if we allow ourselves to enjoy the food that we are craving whenever we want, eventually we can get desensitized to that and find that we don't need it as much. So I want you to kind of think about, how do food rules show up in your life around which foods you try to avoid or only allow yourself to have every once in a while as a treat. And when you are more stressed, do you find yourself thinking about that food more frequently? So how does this show up in your life? The next principle goes along with this, and that is to challenge the food police. Once again, going back to all of the food rules that we have about which foods are good, which foods are bad, which foods should you consume more of, and absolutely. We have our dietary guidelines for Americans that make a lot of recommendations around the foods that you should eat more of and those you should eat less of. And yes, there is research to support those recommendations, but at the same time, a food is neither inherently good nor bad. Everything can fit within a healthy dietary pattern, and as we start to listen to our body's signals, I think that we'll find that we are ultimately choosing more of those foods that are supporting your health and less of those foods that it can have some impact on especially your cardiovascular health or your blood sugars or things like that. But it is when we are so focused on these rules around food that we lose sight of those foods that truly nourish our bodies. We're not listening to what our body is telling us it needs. And we can get into that pattern of depriving ourselves of those treat foods to the point that when we are able to consume them again, we may not eat just that cake slice, we might eat the whole cake. And that definitely is something that we want for our bodies to not feel the need to do. So challenge the food police. Notice when those rules come up in your life and how they impact you. I will say for myself that I get a bit frustrated with my sister who cooks most of the meals at home because she likes to put cheese in a lot of things. And in my mind's eye, I know that cheese is not bad, but I always think of, why are you adding that? That's just more calories and it's more saturated fat. And, my rules, my food police starts to go off. And she is much more about enjoyment of food, as well you should be. So I too am trying to work through some of these principles of especially challenging the food police and all those rules that are out there. The next principle is discover the satisfaction factor. I think that when we get in that habit of dieting, this becomes so hard because you learn through the different diets that you follow which foods you should eat, whether you like them or not, and which foods you shouldn't eat, whether you like them or not. And it's hard to figure out what really lights you up as far as food goes. So, a lot of times you will want to have a snack. And you probably have heard that you should have, a fruit for a snack, maybe pair it with a few nuts, maybe have yogurt with granola. But if these foods don't excite you, and you're really wanting something like maybe you want some chips or maybe you want a cookie and you're trying to substitute these healthier options when your body is telling you, I really just want a cookie right now. You may find that after you eat your healthy snack, you still feel hungry and you still want something else, and you may very well reach for that cookie anyways. Whereas if you had just allowed yourself to enjoy the cookie and really appreciated the cookie, then you might not have had that craving later and wound up eating more calories anyway because you had your healthy snack and then you had your cookie. So what you were trying to avoid, you wound up doing anyway. So to really enjoy and discover the satisfaction factor, it's important to engage all your senses in the eating experience. So usually if we were going to be together and if I had thought ahead a little bit more, I would have sent your centers a bag of Hershey's Kisses. I love to do this with Hershey's Kisses. Most people love chocolate. But you can do it with any food that you feel tastes really good to you. So the next time that you eat something like a Hershey's Kiss, what I want you to do is to engage all your senses while you are eating. So this means you're going to slow down and you're really going to take in everything that makes this food a special food for you. So if you have a Hershey's Kiss, I want you to unwrap it slowly. I want you to notice what the kiss looks like. I want you to, feel the texture of the chocolate. Is it smooth? Do you feel any kind of rough spots within there? What does that Hershey's Kiss feel like between your fingers? Obviously, don't hold it in your hand too long or it's going to melt on you. But just kind of notice it as you're picking it up. Is it smooth? Do you feel any rough spots? What is it like? Then I want for you to bring that Hershey's Kiss up to your nose, and I want you to really smell what that chocolate looks like. This is fantastic when you happen to get a pretty fresh bag of chocolate off the shelf. It's amazing what it smells like. But I want you to just take a smell. What does it smell like to you? Is it a deep aroma of chocolate? Do you detect any kind of bitter notes to it? Especially if it's dark chocolate, you might detect some of that bitterness of the dark chocolate. And then after you have smelled that Hershey's Kiss, I want you to then put it in your mouth, but don't chew yet. I want you to just take a moment, and I want you to notice what it feels like in your mouth as that chocolate starts to melt. At what point do you start to really taste that chocolate in your mouth? What is it like as it starts to melt and coat your tongue? Is that something that you enjoy? And then as you take a bite into the chocolate, notice what those sensations are like. And then as you swallow the chocolate, I want you to notice what that flavor is like going down, and then is there an aftertaste? Is it a good aftertaste? Is it a bad aftertaste? And this whole process of engaging all your senses in eating helps you do a few things. Number one, helps you to slow down your eating, which is important. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit when paying attention to our hunger and satiety cues. This engaging your senses helps you appreciate all of the qualities of the food. It also helps you start to tune in more to which foods do you really like and why, so that you can enjoy more of them. The other thing is that when you take time to really appreciate the food that you're eating, to allow yourself to fully experience eating this food, you oftentimes will find that you're satisfied after a couple of bites. And you may not need to eat the whole slice of cake. You may not need to eat the whole cake to feel satisfied, because you've allowed yourself to really experience that food. And that in and of itself can be even more satisfying. The other thing that we can do with having more satisfaction in our meals is to, and we get to this a little bit more when we talk about gentle nutrition, is to think about using what Abby Sharp, a Canadian dietitian, calls the hunger crushing combo. And that's to have some protein, some fiber, and some fats in all of the foods and snacks that you eat. Because all of those components lead to a greater sense of fullness and greater satiety in what you consumed. So this is where as you really play around with taking more time to experience your food and you start to recognize what kinds of food you like, then you can more consciously choose those foods that are going to have more fiber, have more fat, have more protein, in some combination, and will help you feel satisfied. So if you're the kind of person who likes sweet foods, then choosing a snack that other people like that's salty is not going to cut it for you, and vice versa. So the next time you have a meal or enjoy a chocolate, I want you to just take a little bit of time to engage all your senses and notice everything about that food. And then think about how it made you feel afterwards. All right, the next principle is to feel your fullness. I think almost all of us have, at some point in time, overeaten. It might be that we had a really busy day and we were very late having lunch. So by the time we got to lunch, we were just ravenous. And so we ate very quickly and we ate a lot more food than we intended to. I will confess that I did this the other day. My mother has been in the hospital having had a fall, no injury, but having had a fall. However, we had a lot of confusion around the discharge plans. So I was planning to go down to visit her after lunch, and because of this confusion, I felt that I had to go down there before lunch to kind of sort everything out. And it took a little bit of time. So where I usually would have lunch around maybe 11:30 in the morning, it was more like 2 to 2:30 that I was having lunch, and I was starting to get really hungry in addition to being stressed. So I went to a place that I considered quote-unquote healthy, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, I think it's called. It's only the second time I've been. And looking at the menu, I saw there was a deal for 2 items. So I wound up getting a wrap and a smoothie, and I was trying to make the smoothie healthy. So I added protein powder and collagen powder to it, and had both the smoothie and the flatbread. And I definitely didn't feel very good afterwards because I wasn't paying attention to when I got full. And I just knew I was eating late. I was stressed, and so I ate quicker than I should have and wound up not feeling very good afterwards off of, relatively healthy food. So how can you feel your fullness? You might have seen this before, but before you start eating, in the middle of when you're eating, and then at the end of when you're eating, you should check in with yourself and see where you are on the hunger scale. And ideally, we want to stay more in that middle range. So if we allow ourselves to get to the point of being a 1 on the hunger scale before we eat, so we feel like we are starving, we are actually starting to feel kind of weak and dizzy, we might be getting a little bit of a headache. This goes even beyond the stomach growling. We're going to set ourselves up to be more likely to overeat at that point. So we want to notice when we are getting around the 3 on a hunger scale, and then choose to eat then. So you're pretty hungry, your stomach's beginning to growl. That's definitely the hungriest that you should be getting before you eat. Then as you're eating, about halfway through, so there's kind of the idea that it takes about 20 minutes to feel full. So I would say when you have been enjoying your meal for about 10 minutes, then you want to check in with yourself. How are you feeling now? Are you still feeling a little bit hungry? That might be normal. But are you starting to feel satisfied? You're not really hungry, but you're not full either. You're kind of right in the middle. This is really where we're aiming for stopping eating, somewhere between 5 and 6 on the hunger scale. If we've eaten very quickly, and by the time we check in with ourselves, we may be feeling uncomfortable. If it's Thanksgiving, we might be feeling very uncomfortable. And sometimes we can even get to that 10 so full you feel sick. I have done that a few times. We want to prevent that. Now, with that being said, I think this principle is going to be most difficult for people who have experienced hunger at some point in their life because they didn't have enough food to eat in their household. And that might be you. So you can work towards this, but know that you're probably going to have some additional barriers to really cueing in to whether or not you're hungry, because you're used to that cycle of eating when there's food so that you are okay when it's not. And sometimes you've even learned to ignore your hunger cues because you know there's not food around. If you are experiencing this now, I do encourage you to talk to your senior center directors or to talk to someone at the area agency on aging about resources that are available to help you. They can help you apply for SNAP dollars if you have not done so already. They can help you optimize your SNAP dollars if you have not done so already, as well as connect you with other resources in the community. So if that's you, please reach out to see what resources are available. The next principle is to cope with your emotions with kindness. I've talked about this a little bit with some of the other principles that, our emotions can make it difficult to determine if we're really hungry physically or is it an emotional hunger. So emotional eating takes place on a continuum of intensity. It can go from, just being a little bit bored, so you get a snack, to if you're having full-blown anxiety or upset, anger, and those kind of things, and you're eating out of extreme frustration and emotions, that is something that's a bit different. And if you find yourself doing kind of that really storm eating around your emotions, I would also encourage you to reach out to people for support. You may need to seek out mental health counseling to help you with your emotions. But if you're kind of in that middle range of the normal scope of emotional eating, what you want to do when you find yourself wanting to reach for food is to ask yourself, am I biologically hungry? What am I really feeling? Am I feeling that stomach growling? Has it been a while since I ate? Or am I just feeling a little bit stressed right now? Did I just have an upsetting conversation with someone? Am I feeling that? What do I need right now? Do I need to talk to somebody right now? Or do you need help with something? So maybe you need to ask someone, would you please help me with something? These things to help you de-escalate your emotions in a way that is going to be better for you long term than just reaching for a bag of Oreos. And the most important thing really is to take care of your needs. Make sure that you are getting adequate sleep, that you are taking time to de-stress, that you are moving your body in a way that feels good. This is all important things to help with that emotional side. Principle 8 is respect your body, and this goes back to that idea of health at every size, or the Hayes approach. It's difficult because I, as a dietitian and healthcare provider, In our training, we talk a lot about BMI and the fact that a BMI of 30 or over is considered obese, and it puts people at increased risk for chronic health conditions. And yes, we know this, but that's not necessarily true of every single body out there. And in fact, every person at every size can do things that support their health. Sometimes genetics is a big factor, and you are just going to be a person who happens to live in a larger body. Some people happen to live in a smaller body, and it doesn't mean that one body size or shape is better than another. It is just genetics. So respect your body as it is. Appreciate your body as it is. Do things to take care of your body, no matter the shape and size. That is what is important. And know that our bodies are truly amazing creations, because they do so many cool things every day that we don't even think about. It's amazing how we can heal from injuries, from illnesses. It's amazing how we can do things like go for long walks. It's amazing how we can use our bodies to create beautiful yards if you enjoy yard work and gardening. Our bodies do a lot of really cool things. And so constantly picking on the fact that, oh my gosh, I've gained so much weight. Oh my goodness, I have thunder thighs. Oh my goodness, I have this arm flap stuff. That's not supporting your health journey. And so I encourage you to think about what are the amazing things that your body has done for you throughout your life, and make a conscious effort to tell your body thank you every day for something that it's done for you. Principle 9 is movement, feel the difference. What we want to do with movement is to choose to move in a way that feels good to us. Not thinking that, if I don't run marathons, I'm not a healthy person. Or if I don't enjoy cycling, I'm not a healthy person. Find movement that makes you feel good and move in that way every day. If it's taking classes at your senior center, that's a great way to move. If it's walking around your neighborhood, that's amazing too. If it's taking a dance class or just dancing in your living room, that's awesome. If it's something that makes you feel happy and makes you feel really good in moving your body, that's what you want to do. You don't want to focus so much on, I've got to do these particular exercises for this length of time to have any benefit. You want to enjoy your movement, because you're going to be more likely to stick with the movement if you enjoy it, rather than putting those physical activity rules on yourself. And then the last principle is to honor your health with gentle nutrition. As you come through your journey and you start to trust that you're going to feed your body when it's hungry, you're going to give your body what it is wanting in that moment. If it is berries and yogurt, that's great. If it's a cookie or a slice of cake, that is great too. All foods fit. But when you get to the place where you can trust that you are honoring your hunger, you're rejecting the diet mentality, you're paying attention to your hunger and satiety cues, you are feeling the satisfaction in your food, this is where you can introduce some of those gentle nutrition principles. And this simply means that if given 2 equally palatable options that you would like to eat, that you will make a choice towards the healthier one. So, for example, if you enjoy drinking milk and it doesn't bother you if a milk is whole milk or if a milk is, say, 1%, if you like them equally the same, then you might choose the 1% milk for being just a little bit healthier for you. But if you really don't like 1% milk and you really only want to drink whole milk because you appreciate the texture, then choosing that 1% milk is not going to be helpful for you. It's only when the things are relatively equal in how much it's going to satisfy you that you can trend towards that healthier option. All right, so those are the 10 principles of intuitive eating. I'm not going to go through all of these slides. I'm just going to touch on a couple of ones. It kind of comes up with, okay, intuitive eating, that sounds really great, but what if I've got a chronic health condition like diabetes or kidney disease where my healthcare provider tells me I have to follow a specific diet or I have to be really careful about carbohydrates and those kind of things? So let's kind of see what some of the research says about this. This first study looked at intuitive eating and cardiovascular disease, and this was a study among 79 older adults in the community who were at least 58 years of age. They took all kinds of markers of cardiovascular disease, fasting blood draw, looking for things like blood lipids. They looked at their body composition, their BMI, and then they gave them questionnaires to determine intuitive eating. They used what's called the Intuitive Eating Scale 2, and they also looked at exercise motivation as well as their physical activity via the accelerometer. And what they found is that those participants who had higher scores on that intuitive eating scale did in fact have lower LDL to HDL ratio. They did have lower triglycerides as well as lower CRP, which is a marker of inflammation. And all of those were statistically significant. You can tell that by the p-value being less than, let's see if I can, hopefully you can see this is pointing to the right thing, that p-value being less than 0.05 for all three of those. Well, actually, the CRP was not quite statistically significant because that was p-value of 0.09. But they, didn't find any associations between exercise motivation and amount of exercise or something like that. So the intuitive eating was the more important factor in this particular study with those outcomes. Another study looked at intuitive eating in type 2 diabetes and diabetes control. And these participants were also on at least one of the oral anti-diabetic drugs, but they were not on insulin. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. And once again, they looked at the intuitive eating scale 2, and there are some component subscales about, giving yourself non-conditional permission to eat the desired food when hungry, classifying food as neutral, eating for physical and non-emotional reasons, and reliance on hunger to determine when and how much to eat. And so their results were showing that those who scored higher on the intuitive eating 2 scores, I believe, were using a lower dose of the oral anti-diabetic drug, if I remember correctly from the study. It's been a while since I looked at it, but I believe that is what this particular chart was showing. And then there were a couple of other studies, so if you're interested, you can go back and look at those around intuitive eating and diabetes. And then this last study is about intuitive eating with chronic kidney disease. And, this is a pretty small sample size, only 23 patients who were 58 to 68 years of age. And some things that they were looking at here were, some of the health outcomes around chronic kidney disease, their lab values, and they didn't see any association between intuitive eating and lab values like the blood urea nitrogen or the creatinine and those kind of things. But what they did find was that those participants who ate more intuitively, according to the intuitive eating scale, they tended to have higher evaluation on that short health questionnaire, higher evaluation of their mental health, their general health, their vitality, and their social functioning. And what this means is that those who are eating more intuitively had a higher quality of life compared to participants who weren't. Once again, this was a pretty small study, so there would need to be a lot more research to look to see if this association held up with a larger group of people, and over long term, what impact that might have on their management of the chronic kidney disease. This particular study didn't show how well CKD management was affected by intuitive eating, so there need to be more studies around that. But what this does kind of show is that it is possible to engage in more intuitive eating even though you've got a chronic health condition. All right, so just some of the challenges and benefits of practicing intuitive eating when you have a chronic health condition. A challenge is that when you go to a doctor and you've been diagnosed with a chronic health condition, you are very likely given evidence-based dietary recommendations for that chronic condition. If it's heart disease, of course, it's limit your sodium, it's limit your saturated fat, those kind of things. If it's diabetes, it's manage your carbohydrate intake. You want to have consistent carbohydrates across the day, not too many. Some providers might even tell you to go with a lower carbohydrate plan if you have diabetes. So you get a lot of recommendations, and yes, they are evidence-based. So that can be a challenge of how do you intuitively practice those dietary recommendations. Another challenge is that it does take a while to really redevelop intuitive eating for you. So you might have to use traditional strategies in addition to the intuitive eating strategies to manage your condition. So finding a way to follow the dietary pattern while at the same time working on some of those principles of intuitive eating can be very beneficial, such as paying closer attention to your hunger and satiety cues. Perhaps choosing foods that are going to be more satisfying for you within the dietary guidelines. The other thing is that sometimes you have families and friends who might hinder your ability to eat intuitively. They might encourage you to eat certain foods, or oh, come on, have a piece of cake. We don't go out to eat that often. Have a piece of cake. Or it might be, ooh, you've got diabetes. Should you be eating that cake at all? I don't think so. So you can get messages like that. The other side of this, though, is that there are many benefits. Is that intuitive eating might enhance your motivation and adherence to lifestyle change because you're paying attention to what your body wants and needs. That intuitive eating might be associated with higher quality of life, as was seen in the study with the patients with chronic kidney disease. Intuitive eating can help you address the emotional aspects of chronic conditions, because a lot of times when we're dealing with a chronic health condition, we can feel very stressed out. We can even feel depressed. and that might make us more likely to eat emotionally. So if we pay attention to these principles of, honor your hunger, pay attention to your hunger, pay attention to your hunger and satiety cues, choose foods that are supporting what you need now, that can help with some of the emotional aspects. So if this has been interesting to you, I really encourage you to set a goal to eat intuitively. So how you might start is notice when and why you eat. You may also reject the diet mentality. So when you start to find yourself referring to foods as good or bad, notice that and start to let that go. All foods fit within a healthy diet. Appreciate your body and everything that it has done for you, does for you today, and will continue to do for you. Listen to your hunger and satiety cues. Pay attention to that hunger scale before you eat, as you're eating, and after you eat. Enjoy your food. Choose foods that you love. Don't choose foods just because this is healthier for me if you don't truly like that food. Choose foods that you enjoy. Practice joyful movement to help connect your mind to your body. That makes it a little bit easier to eat more intuitively. And add those gentle nutrition principles that when two foods are relatively equal in how much you're going to enjoy them and how much they're going to satisfy your hunger, at that point you can choose the one that maybe has a little bit of a stronger nutrition profile. And set a goal for where you are in your journey. If you have been following these principles, then you are golden. You may find one or two things that you're still working on, but if you're just starting out, some of the first things that you can do really is just learning to pay attention to how you are feeling when you are reaching for food, and then kind of go from there. So start with where you are in your journey and seek support if needed. So here are the references I used throughout the presentation. And I want to thank you for being here today. I am wishing you much success if you are embarking on or continuing this intuitive eating journey. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to talk with you more about intuitive eating or any other ways that I can support you in your nutrition and health journey. I hope you have a wonderful rest of August, and I'll see you in September. I think we are talking about the flexitarian diet. Now that I have said eat intuitively, reject diet mentality, and looking for that next diet around the corner, we're going to talk about flexitarianism. But I think that there are some benefits to that dietary pattern, so we'll kind of discuss that and try to keep it within the framework of how it could fit with intuitive eating. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you in September. Bye, everyone.